Veterans Day honors the veterans of all the wars fought by the United States of America since the beginning of its history. Here is a brief history of all the different wars fought by United States troops. Starting in the 1600s, many colonists from Britain began to settle in the New World. They formed 13 colonies. Over time, the colonists began to become dissatisfied and angry with the British government that controlled them. Eventually, they broke out in rebellion. When King George of England sent many British troops to American shores, the war known as the Revolutionary War began. Eventually, the Continental Army of the colonists, led by George Washington, prevailed. The war officially ended in 1783. Approximately 25,000 American soldiers died during this war. From the beginning of its history, the United States did not have a very good relationship with Great Britain. As time went on, the relationship worsened, mostly due to British restrictions on the seas. Eventually, by 1812, Americans could take it no longer. In 1812, President James Madison signed a declaration of war against Great Britain. At that point, the War of 1812 began. For the most part, the Americans were unsuccessful. The United States forces lost 2,260 men in all. The war was ended with a peace treaty. After Texas broke off from Mexico, Texas became disputed territory between the United States and Mexico. Eventually, the United States decided to take control of Texas, and the Texans agreed. Mexico claimed that Texas was still their territory. Because of this and a number of other reasons, the Mexican War began in 1846. The Mexican army expected immediate success due to their superiority in numbers and experience. However, the United States won almost easily. Two of the most important generals on the American side in the Mexican War were Zachary Taylor, who would later become President of the United States, and Winfield Scott. The war ended in 1847. The Mexican War led the way into the Civil War. For many years, the southern and northern states have been fighting over the issue of slavery. Should it be allowed to expand into the new territories acquired by the United States or not? People called abolitionists wished to abolish slavery altogether. The country made compromise after compromise to keep peace between the northern and southern states. However, after the Mexican War, the United States had acquired much new territory, and new disputes arose over how this territory would be divided. Would the new territory become slave territory or free territory? These disputes and many others led the way into the most horrific war of the country's history, the Civil War. After many years of rivalry between the North and the South of the United States, tensions became so bad that war broke out. This war became known as the Civil War, fought between 1861 and 1865. It was the bloodiest war in the country's history. Brothers fought brothers. The states of the North fought as the Union, and eventually were fighting for the cause of freedom and union. The Southern Confederacy was fighting for slavery and the right to secede. Over 600,000 men died as a result of the Civil War. In fact, in one battle, 7,000 men died in only 20 minutes. This was one of the bloodiest battles, one of the bloodiest wars of history. The President of the United States at the time was Abraham Lincoln. The President of the Confederacy was Jefferson Davis. One of the most important generals of the North was Ulysses Simpson Grant. And one of the most important generals of the South was Robert E. Lee. After 4 long years of war, the South finally surrendered at Appomattox in 1865. Through a very complicated tangle of alliances in Europe. In 1914, the First World War was set off by the assassination of Francis Ferdinand, the heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary. Because of various alliances held by numerous countries in Europe, almost the entire Europe ended up mobilizing for war. At first, the United States declared neutrality, but when the Germans began sinking ships left and right, the United States was forced to enter the war. The war lasted from 1914 to 1917. By the end of the war, it was the second bloodiest conflict in human history, and claimed the lives of many United States soldiers. The war left Germany humiliated and defeated. The Second World War, even more devastating than the first, began in 1939 with the German invasion of Poland. It is generally believed that World War II was caused by the end of World War I, namely the humiliation of Germany. Under the leadership of the Nazi Party and Adolf Hitler, Germany invaded many countries in Europe and began to take over. Two sides were known as the Axis powers and the Allies. The war ended in 1945 with the surrender of the final Axis nation, Japan, to the Allies. Over the course of the war, many United States soldiers perished. Aside from that, 6 million Jews perished during the Holocaust. Another novelty of World War II was the use was the widespread use of tanks and airplanes. One of the greatest horrors of World War II was the atomic bomb, a last resort method used by the United States to end the war with Japan. The Korean War was a conflict between North and South Korea, which began on June 25, 1950, when North Korea invaded South Korea. In order to stop the spread of communism, the United States sent many soldiers to aid South Korea in fighting off the communist North Korea. The war was very bloody. Approximately 34,000 American soldiers perished in 3 years of the Korean War. The war was ended in 1953 through an armistice. The two Koreas remain separate to this day.
One of the most divisive military efforts in United States history since the Civil War was the Vietnam War. A subject of widely differing opinions at the time, the controversy rages still today over whether or not America should have involved itself in this bloody and hard-fought conflict. The primary aim of our involvement in Vietnam was to contain the spread of communism in Southeast Asia. Following the events of the Korean War and the Chinese Civil War of 1949, the United States officially backed the anti-communist Republic of South Vietnam against the forces of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, North Vietnam. Vietnamese received military and economic assistance from the Union of Soviet Social Republics, or the USSR, and the People's Republic of China, Communist China, which greatly prolonged the conflict and created a significantly more difficult obstacle for the U.S. armed forces to surmount. What followed was one of the most brutal and unique wars ever fought by America. This course will examine the history of the Vietnam War.
The United States originally entered Iraq in order to overthrow the regime of Saddam Hussein. We ended up staying there much longer than we expected. Many lives have been lost, and much money has been spent, and the controversy still rages as to what the United States should have done and should do about Iraq. The United States originally went into Afghanistan to overthrow the Taliban. Today, the United States is still there after approximately 10 years. There is an official Afghani government in place, but if the United States leaves, the Taliban will very likely take over once again. The United States is trying to train the Afghan army
while it says international forces
to be self-sufficient
on the ground,
in keeping peace and order in the country. Although it seems that in order to stabilize the country, the United States must remain for much longer, the President has promised to remove many troops very soon. What will happen is in the future.